We've indicated the numbering and the lining up of the trusses on the relevant sections of the roof. The next step in preparing the structure for the roof is the wall plates that get affixed onto the top layers of brick.
Place the correct size wall plates on the load-bearing walls and ensure that the wall plates are level. Note that the wall plate is placed flush with the inside face of the wall. Mark the positions of the trusses on the wall plates according to the roof truss layout drawing. Position the first truss on the wall plate on the mark indicated and nail on either side of the truss to avoid horizontal movement. Slide the truss until centrally located over the walls and then nail temporarily into position by skew nailing through the heel of the bottom chord into the wall plate. Plumb the truss by using a straight edge and a spirit level, and then temporarily brace the top chord. Straighten the top chords by pulling a line from the heel to the apex. Ensure the temporary bracing members are of size not less than 38 by 76 grade 5 and are nailed to wall plates with 2 wire nails. When trusses are erected between gable walls, the first and last trusses are positioned 50 mm away from the gable end walls. Trusses erected between gable walls must be stabilized by fixing a temporary bracing member diagonally across the webs for the first 3 trusses. Install a truss at the other end of the building on the correct mark and ensure that the heel end of the truss projects the same distance from the wall plate as the first truss. Then temporarily brace the truss using the same procedure as the first truss. Drive a nail into the apex of each truss of the first and last trusses, which have been placed into position, and pull a line firmly across the apex points between these 2 trusses. Erect the intermediate trusses at the positions marked on the wall plates and ensure that the apex of each truss is directly under the line, and skew nail the heel onto the wall plate. Sight the apex of each truss to see that it is visually plumb at this stage. Then fix a batten across the top chords close to the apex, as well as a runner across the center of each bottom chord to hold the trusses in position. Here you can see it on site. We now need to straighten the chords of the trusses. We start with the bottom chords. Pull a line along the length of each bottom chord from heel to heel using spacer blocks between the line and the tie beam. Where the tie beam needs to be straightened, the nail holding the runner is released, tie beam is pulled straight in line with the fish line, and the runner is nailed permanently. A vertical line is marked on the side of the top chord of the first and last trusses at the heel points, and a nail is driven into the top chord of each truss adjacent to the mark. A line is now pulled tightly between these end trusses to ensure that all the chords at the heels are level. Where the trusses are not level, it will be necessary to insert and nail wedges. It is important to fix wedges on both sides of the trusses to maintain plumbness. We are now in a position to install the permanent rafter bracing. Note how unstable the structure is before fixing the bracing. We select the timber size and length specified. It will normally be of 38 by 114 grade 5, but may be 38 by 76 grade 5 if the truss span is less than 6,6 meters. The timber is placed over the chords and cut to the required length, and then positioned under the top chords and taken from the apex of the first truss to be used, as shown on the truss layout drawing, to the wall plates next to the last truss shown. This is at an angle of about 45 degrees on plan. Where the length of timber supplied for the rafter bracing is not long enough for the requirements, it can be spliced in order to achieve the required length, as shown in the detail on page 42 of the Volume 2 Handbook. The bracing member is nailed temporarily onto the wall plate and held at the apex of the first truss. Permanent fixing onto the wall plate will be dealt with later. Each truss is now checked out for plumbness using a straight edge and spirit level. The rafter brace is nailed at the apex of the first truss. The rafters are now checked for straightness by pulling a line from the apex to the heel. If these need to be adjusted, the nails holding the temporary battens are released, the rafters straightened and the battens re-nailed. The rafter bracing member is then permanently nailed to the underside of each rafter with the required number of nails, 3 for 114 timber and 2 for 76 timber. Permanent fixing of the rafter bracing to the wall plate is of utmost importance. For trusses of spans less than 6,6 meters, the timber bracing members are nailed securely to the wall plate using 3 number 100 mm nails. A block of timber approximately 150 mm long is placed against the heel on the opposite side of the truss and nailed to the wall plate using 6 number 75 mm nails, all as shown in the detail on page 42 of Volume 2 Handbook. For truss spans longer than 6,6 meters, the bracing member has to be fixed at the wall plate using a shelf brace. The shelf is of timber size 38 by 228 and is cut precisely to fix between the truss spacing. The shelf is placed over the 38 by 114 rafter bracing as close as possible to the wall plate. The shelf is held in position by nailing through the rafters on either side. 2 by 12 mm holes are then drilled through the shelf and the rafter bracing to accommodate the 12 mm bolts, washers and nuts which will secure the bracing. The shelf is secured to the rafters with 1 pair of hurricane clips fully nailed with clout nails into the rafters on either side of the shelf and onto the shelf itself. Timber blocks are nailed into the wall plates on either side of the trusses where the shelf occurs, using 6 number 75 mm nails to each block. This detail appears on page 44 of Volume 2 Handbook. Where the truss spans are over 9 meters, it is necessary to use a bracing frame as a stiffener on tiled roofs. The fixing detail for this frame is shown on page 52 of Volume 2 Handbook. Select the trusses shown on the truss layout which are to be used for the frame. Then fix a continuous 38 by 38 bearer nailed with 75 mm nails onto the sides of the rafters at 300 mm centers and 38 mm below the top of the rafters. These bearers are painted in green as shown on the model and again referred to on the site installation in green in order to more easily associate with site procedures. The frame is painted blue on the model and is shown in the finished position on the site in blue. The frame is installed by hoisting it onto the roof and placing it onto the 38 by 38 bearers, and then sliding it until the frame is adjacent to the apex of the roof. The frame for the other side of the truss is installed and the two frames are located together at the apex. The frames are then nailed into the rafter sides with 75mm nails at 300mm centers. The two frames are then securely fixed together at the apex by winding a bracing strap firmly around the two frames and nailing the strap into the frames. An alternative method of connecting the frames is by bolting two pieces of 38 by 152 timber which have been plated together as detailed on page 53 of Volume 2 Handbook. The trusses must be permanently tied down onto the walls by firmly pulling the galvanized straps or the wire ties over the rafters of trusses and nailing the straps into the opposite sides of the rafters. Or where wire ties are used for concrete tiled roofs, a nail is driven into the side of the rafters at the heel and the wire is pulled over the rafter and twisted around the nail to firmly hold the truss down and prevent any uplift. The tiling battens are now fixed onto the truss rafters. Measure a mark 25mm down from the apex of the first and the last trusses, pull a chalk line over all the trusses and strike the position of the apex battens. At the lower end of the trusses we fix a batten referred to as a plaster batten. The position of this batten is marked by using a spirit level held vertically against the outside of the exterior wall and a mark made on the top of the first and the last truss rafters where they abut the level. A chalk line is now pulled across all the trusses and the position of the plaster batten is marked on each truss. The plaster batten is nailed above the chalk mark onto every rafter with a 75mm nail. The roof erected in the workshop will have no overhangs, so the plaster batten in this instance is also the tilting batten. The tilting batten is of 38 by 50 section and is fixed standing 50mm high, so that the first course of tiles is raised to the same plane as all the other courses. Nail the plaster batten above the marked line. Now measure the distance between the top of the plaster batten and the chalk mark at the apex batten along the length of a rafter. The batten spaces for the cement tiles should be approximately 320mm, but not more than 345mm centers. In this case, the rafter length measures 4080mm. We divide this dimension by 320mm to achieve a spacing. The answer is 12,75. This means that we will need either 12 or 13 batten spacings. Divide 4080 by 12. This equals 340mm, which falls within the tolerance of maximum 345 spacing. So we accept the batten spacing of 340mm. The first and last trusses are now marked along the length of the rafters from the apex batten. Mark at 340mm centers in order to achieve equal spacings of the battens. Each rafter is now marked by striking the chalk line across all the rafters. When an overhang is required, the plaster batten will be a 38 by 38 member. The batten spacing, calculated previously, is now measured downwards along the overhang from the plaster batten, depending on whether the overhang is for one or two tiles. Measure the length of the required overhang. Trim each overhang to length and fix the 38 by 50 tilting batten placed on end and fixed flush with the edge of the overhang. The 38 by 50 tiling batten is always the lowest batten. All the battens are now nailed onto each rafter above the chalk lines. Do not splice battens immediately above a previous splice. The splice can only occur on the same rafter after at least 3 batten intervals. Battens must span over at least 3 rafters. The battens must be cut to length at the gable ends to suit the required finishes. The tilting batten must not be cut. Where plastic underlay is required on the roof, the sheeting must be fixed horizontally over the rafters prior to fixing of battens. The underlay is secured with clout nails to the center of each rafter, starting by protruding 20 mm beyond the position of the plaster batten. The horizontal and vertical overlaps shall be not less than 150 mm at all laps. The vertical overlap must occur over a rafter. Using a chalk line, we mark the batten centers onto the sheeting at the calculated batten spacings. The battens are then nailed into the rafters over the underlay. Where the truss design requires web runners, these 38 by 76 continuous members are nailed onto the center line of each specified web, using 2 75 mm nails at every connection. The runners are cross-braced in the bracing bay shown on the layout drawing. Cross-bracing is fixed diagonally at approximately 45 degrees across 3 trusses, that is over 2 bays, on the opposite side to the web runner, using 2 number 75 mm nails at each connection. The design details and cross-bracing are all indicated on pages 56 and 60 of the Volume 2 Handbook. In the picture you see, as well as the drawings that follow, the runner is coloured blue, the cross-bracing shaded green, and the permanent top chord bracing is coloured red for reference purposes. A web stiffener or T-bracing is used for lateral restraint of webs where less than 3 trusses require this form of bracing. Page 61 of the Volume 2 Handbook clearly shows the sizes of timber to be used, as well as the fixing method of the T-bracing. The web to be stiffened is measured and the dimensions of timber to be used is cut to length. On the roof being erected, a 2-member girder requires a web stiffener. A 38 by 114 grade 5 member is cut and fully nailed along the length of the web with 75 mm nails at 300 mm centers and nailed into both webs of the 2-ply. Here it is shown in green. The details for the bottom chord runners are shown on page 59 of Volume 2 Handbook. Bottom chord runners and cross bracing are fixed permanently to bottom chords of sheeted roofs and for tiled roofs where no ceiling is installed, or where the ceiling is suspended from the bottom chords, that is, not fixed directly with branding to the underside of the bottom chords. The positions of the bottom chord runners will be indicated on the layout drawing, and the cross bracing will occur in the braced bay. Runners are of 38 by 76 grade 5 members, nailed continuously over the top side of the bottom chords of each truss, using 2 number 75 mm wire nails at every connection. These runners are cross-braced with 38 by 76 grade 5 timber fixed diagonally across the bottom chords at approximately 45 degrees between the runners, using 2 number 75 mm nails at each connection. For roofs which are covered with metal sheeting or cement fibre sheets, we use 50 by 76 purlins, which are fixed to the rafters on edge and securely fastened down using hurricane clips or wire ties, all as detailed on page 8 of Volume 2 Handbook. The procedure for erecting of the trusses is the same as that for a tiled roof. The maximum purlin centers, unless specified differently by the designer, are usually about 1100 millimeters, and the spacings on the rafters for each job will be equally spaced at these maximum centers by dividing the rafter length by 1100 millimeters. For example, a 5-meter rafter length is divided by 1100. Answer is 4,54. This will require 4 or 5 purlins. 4 spaces will be 1250 millimeters. This is greater than the maximum 1100. Therefore, 5 spaces will be required with purlins at 1 meter centers. Top chord bracing for a sheeted roof is fixed according to the detail found on page 50 of Volume 2 Handbook. The 39 by 114 grade 5 members are cut to length and nailed to the top of the rafters alongside the purlins in a zigzag pattern at about 45 degrees along the length of the rafter. They are nailed at each connection with 3 number 75mm wire nails. Bracing frames for sheeted roofs are only required for spans exceeding 15 meters or where specified by the designer. All other runners and bracing required for a sheeted roof are fixed in a similar manner to those for a tiled roof and are installed where the design requires. Once all bracing members are installed and the rationally designed roof has been inspected and signed off by the appointed engineer, the roof tiles or roof sheeting can be fixed onto the battened or purlined roof.